and we'll continue with the next panel on intergenerational trauma. You already know Jana and Michaela, so I won't introduce them again, but I would like to welcome Jana Ivanova. She's a Bulgarian journalist, writer, documentary filmmaker, art curator. She wears many hats. She also has received multiple awards for her reporting over the years, and she currently splits her time between Bulgaria and Germany, and some of you will probably attend her workshop tomorrow on the so-called revival process and how we as media professionals and as society reflect on this topic. So thank you very much for joining us. And I would like to start maybe with Jana. Could you tell us a bit what do we mean when we talk about intergenerational trauma?
Is it working? Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Boriana. So again, to be on the same page and not to have this Babylonian, again, forgot, not castle, but tower. Yeah. Yeah. So, do we have presentation on? Yeah. Yeah. So, when we are speaking of trauma, of course we do not mean that it's virus, trauma virus, which is spreading. But to be honest, trauma is contagious. And when we are speaking about transmission of trauma, we can think of horizontal transmission, and horizontal transmission is very widespread among journalist community when we are interviewing vulnerable respondent with traumatic background. Of course, we are compassionate and trauma could transmit. But we are having also phenomenon of vertical transmission of trauma. So if horizontal transmission of trauma means, compassion-based, empathy-based, social emotions-based transmission, because if somebody is very anxious, it's also contagious. We're just feeling the same. Patterns of interaction matters, because if my patterns are to victimize somebody because I was victimized previously, then this pattern of behavior transmits my trauma horizontally or even vertically as well. And so-called projective identification, if I expect that every human being is a cruel and might betray me, then I behave in a way with these human beings that might provoke this kind of behavior. So, I will not go into details, but when we are speaking about vertical transmission of trauma, we are speaking about family patterns of interaction, family paradigm, whether family thinks that the world is friendly or hostile, whether the family thinks that we are worth to be loved, to be respected, or we are just helpless, etc. So we are speaking about community because drug use might be an indicator of community trauma, because community tries to self-soothe, and drug use, poverty, and crime could be indicators of transgenerational trauma, which community is trapped in. So societal trauma, societal level trauma, which means that that's post-genocidal trauma or post-totalitarian trauma or post-conflict trauma. So lots of actually types of trauma, especially in case of man-made catastrophe, as are oppressions, political oppressions, totalitarianism, genocide, wars, armed conflicts. And mechanisms of transmission here are different narratives, lots of narratives, and I will demonstrate several of them in the next slides. Again, patterns of interaction and so-called deposition. When the generation which was exposed to trauma during political oppressive regime cannot handle grief, does not mourn out it in an authentic way, and just deposits own traumatic experience into the next generation. So I would like to show you this classical triangle of victim, aggressor, bystander in the case of man-made catastrophe like violence-related trauma. And here, the factors which are facilitating transmission are social emotions again, patterns of interaction, sharing style. Actually, the questions which Boriana prepared to me before the panel was, should we share our emotions or not? And of course we share our emotions, and our traumatic background, but there are two extreme ways. One way is conspiracy of silence, when nobody speaks about trauma in family, inside family, or in the country even. And if you don't speak about traumatic experience, then it becomes conspiracy, and it affects a lot, because our fantasies might create a much worse picture than just to hear what happened. But another extreme of sharing is too much sharing, too much yelling, too much crying, and then that's overwhelming to the next generation. Yeah? So, and mourning style. And here I would like to bring the example that's in Georgian, Russia-occupied region of Tskhin Valley. Now it's called South Ossetia. And that's a school, number 5, if I am correct. And that's a sculpture of so-called crying father. So I mentioned narratives which transmits trauma from one generation to generation, and that's exactly the narrative which actually helps the trauma of Georgian Ossetian conflict to transmit from generation to generation. So in the schoolyard, the graveyard was organized during the war, and children every day when they are passing schoolyard and going to the school, they are seeing killed soldiers, but even more they are seeing this sculpture. And in the Ossetian culture, man who is crying is not tolerable. If man is crying, that means huge catastrophe, intolerable and unforgivable one. So this is an image of crying father, which actually keeps hostile attitude towards Georgians, because Georgians are those who made Ossetian men to cry. So this is case, actually, we were working together with my mentor, Vamik Volkan, in 90s in Ossetia. We were going there, Tskhin Valley region, almost every month, and helping children with trauma to to treat them. And this sculpture was one of the things which attracted our attention. So in terms of non-authentic ways of mourning which facilitate transmission of trauma from generation to generation, that sentimental mourning, yelling, crying, victimhood, shared victimhood phenomena like this father is symbolizing, revengeful mourning when you are trying vendetta type attitude, and victorious mourning when you are celebrating your loss, not grieving it out. This does not facilitate dealing with the past. So what is authentic mourning about? Not crying, not at all. It's about multi-stakeholder process of bringing justice, of dealing with the past, of scientific consideration, what happened, how happened, and how to prevent in the future. Art and memorization policies are very important. So that's a multi-stakeholder process in the society which needs to happen to actually deal with the past. So again, images which bring traumatic memories to the society. That's another narrative. Deleted faces from the Stalin's period, repressed people's photographies. Yeah? So it brings narrative to the next generation. Or Ukrainian Holodomor statue. Sometimes trauma is just forgotten. Conspiracies of silence happens. And in this way, it's actually sorry, I should return back. Yeah. Yeah. In this way, can we make a full screen? Yeah. So here we are. So we are speaking about collective trauma and transmission from generation to generation. But I would like to focus your attention that there is such a phenomenon as transmission of resilience from generation to generation. So it's very important in case of journalism, in case of media, in case of individual treatment, not to pathologize traumatic experience. There is transgenerational transmission of resilience as well. And here is a very nice story, not nice, but very illustrative story of former Yugoslavian conflict, how actually 14th century tragedy and trauma was revitalized by Milosevic in his struggle for political power, and how this unprocessed past trauma actually triggered war. So I will not go into details. So about media, what to facilitate when we try not to transmit trauma from generation, not to contribute to transmission of trauma from generation to generation. We
Jana,
yeah?
Can we touch on the media a bit later?
Okay,
can we
yeah,
pause
not to uncover all the secrets.
Yeah,
okay,
thank
okay,
you.
I don't know how, probably you can...
My colleagues will take care of it. Thank you.
Just up to previous slide. And principle of Scheherazade, just to stop on the most interesting point.
Yeah, there you go. So we can keep listening. And thank you so much for this crash course on intergenerational trauma. I know this is a difficult topic to sum up in like 7 minutes, so we appreciate it. I want to start with Diana, actually, from what we heard from Jana about passing on trauma from generation to generation. You've been interesting as a journalist, as a writer, in the silences surrounding Bulgaria's post-communist past. You've been involved in projects regarding the heirs of the families or parents who served for the secret police during communist times. Why do you think you were drawn to those topics? Again, very difficult to tackle and cover.
Аз ще говоря на български.
I will address the audience in Bulgarian. I believe this is a Bulgarian topic. I was very interested in what the speakers said at the beginning. I realized that something that was really crucial for me, I started working as a journalist in the early 90s, and I needed some time to realize how unprepared we were for this influx of emotion following the political changes in Bulgaria. I have been socialized not to express emotion. If you remember our communist media, the newspapers had this completely neutral, really horrifying tone. There was no emotion there. So from the media, you got no sense of the emotions of the people reported on. I realized I was angry eventually, and I realized I found it, I judged myself for being angry. And following the changes, we were supposed to be neutral. So if somebody showed emotion, they're lacking in self-restraint and manners and so on. So this became a trauma for me. If you remember the protest from the 14th of December,
подмяна на това, което се случва, ние сме
89. This was a traumatic experience for many of us. We young people were protesting, and we were portrayed by the media in a very negative manner. So this anger was being portrayed in a negative light by so many of the Bulgarian media outlets. It took me many years to process this and to see that our whole society was unprepared. There was no psychotherapy in Bulgaria back then, and no one taught us what to do with our emotions. I had a difficulty accessing and understanding my emotions. So when I started working as a journalist, I believed, well, I should be neutral, I should focus on the facts, and I had no idea how to relate to myself. This internal conflict continued until I realized, well, I have to focus on my past, and I should stop judging myself for my emotions. I have a booklet here in front of me. My sister and I published a book with stories of my father. He wrote this book, and my sister provided the illustrations. And as I was reading this book, I saw how strong my emotions, how strong the emotions of my father were, and he was never able to voice them. And socialism was a system where it was not possible to show any anger to the system, to the institutions, and so on. And I think the two topics are related. We believe that as journalists, we should control our emotions, we should not be too emotional, but however, we should realize it's not possible to have complete neutrality. It's not possible to forget about your background, your gender, your ethnicity, your family history, and so on, your class. If somebody claims they can be completely neutral, this is false. So I think we should turn the paradigm around. We should be aware, we should be aware of the factors that are forming our worldview. And I think this is an issue that Bulgarian media, Bulgarian journalists should focus on. We as human beings have vast emotions, of course, but with self-reflection, self-realization as to how to be neutral as journalists. For me, this was really a process. I had really a long journey to find other ways to access my sensitivity, my feelings. And I didn't have the tools to access them back then. And actually, these feelings come with the job, they come with the turf. I shouldn't hide them, I should find a way to process them. And how did you resolve this problem? Well, firstly, I realized how important it is to consider the personal perspective. Because in socialism, we had just one general narrative. This is what the truth is. This was the narrative. But it's actually important to break it down, to allow many voices to be heard. So the first project I did back in 2004 with Georgi Gospodinov and other authors, I lived during socialism. Everybody is an expert on their life with their unique emotions, and they have the right to tell their unique story. So the project touched many people, but many people thought, oh, this is a very superficial way to tell the story. But actually, no, we try to just provide different perspectives. And this project allowed me to go deeper. So I used the personal perspective as a starting point, but then I built up on it. And so this worked, allowed me to break down the narrative and to find a way to channel my emotions into my work. So I tell the story, but I also inform the audience what I'm feeling at the time. Thank you. Now, a question for Michaela.
You know, um, your family went through one of the grimmest periods of the communist regime, basically. How did this inform the way you approach stories and the way you try? You mentioned kind of trying to find, searching for authentic narratives. How did this either help you or, yeah, move you towards that goal?
So I would say that all of my interest in journalism probably comes from this trauma, from this experience, and you know, all of my capacity for empathy comes from this too. Like, if you think about the fact that I spent, I don't know, 25 years in the closet about being a Bulgarian Turk because I have the quote unquote privilege of having a Bulgarian name. And so it wasn't immediately obvious to people that I'm a Turk. I had to actually come out to them. And I'm still coming out to them. Yesterday for lunch, I met with a friend who's known me since I was 15. And he was like, why the fuck are these people saying you're a Bulgarian Turk? What does this mean? And why don't I know about it? People are showing up with this level of entitlement of knowing these things about me. And I'm still coming out to people about this. This is giving me, or has given me, a lot of empathy for anyone who is living a fake identity or, not being able to show up with their full self in society in any kind of way. And because I know this pain and because I know this shame and guilt, I know what it is like to see another human being and to make space for their shame and guilt and to say you can free yourself from this. I don't see you as somebody worthy of this shame and guilt. You're worthy of freedom. So I think this is how this is how my trauma basically helped me approach people and approach, traumatized people or marginalized or oppressed people.
Thank you very much for sharing this with us. Have you experienced a similar conflict as the one Jana was describing between the emotions or this kind of, I guess, the challenge of coming out, as you just mentioned, and, approaching, again, sensitive topics? We talked about a mother who lost her child, etc. So did you experience how much you bring into the story, you show up or open up to the people you interview?
I think because my process of coming out was so long, there was a lot of internalized racism I was dealing with. I actually really believed I was a second-class human, like, for a very long time. And I made all kinds of excuses for the reasons why, like, Bulgarians or Germans or whoever else would treat me as less than. And I justified that for them. And when I finally got to a place where I felt like I had my own worth and I, maybe had this narrative, this different kind of narrative of I'm a survivor of an injustice that has been done to my people. I think once I got to that place, it became really easy for me to talk to people and to open up to people and to create this safe space for people to let out their hidden identities or let out their pain. But before then, it was difficult for me, definitely. It was difficult for me to talk about sexuality. It was difficult for me to talk about any kind of closeted identities. And I did, and I still do, think that Bulgaria needs to have a reckoning, that we need a conversation about what we've done to the Bulgarian Turks. I think the Bulgarian Turks are very segregated here. People tend to think of Bulgarian Turks as a monolith because, oh, look, they're all gonna vote for DPS. But we're so different. In the broadest of all divisions, I would say there's at least three kinds of us, and there's the ones who are assimilated like me, who maybe were in your classroom. There were three of us.
Actually, there was somebody that
see?
later on, like years after we graduated, I saw on Facebook that he changed his name from a Bulgarian to a Turkish one.
Yeah. So we are among you. You may not know about us, but we've been here all along. And then there's the people who grew up in the smaller places where it was possible to retain your identity to some extent, to learn the language, maybe to keep your name, that kind of thing. And then there's the people who are in exile, people who are now connecting with me over the internet, who are like second generation in Turkey and are like, I need to find my roots. I have a Bulgarian citizenship and my dad loved this country dearly and I don't understand, all my ancestors' bones are buried in this land and I don't know the first thing about it. So I'm like, come sister. Let's find the things together. But what I'm saying is we're finding each other one by one like this. And there's no community and there's no conversation. And when we get together and we try to talk about these things, Bulgarians come sometimes and say like these really happy stories about how they helped their neighbors, these kumbaya moments. And they're true and they're important. And I am all for reconciliation. I don't want us to like fight over this forever. I want to feel like I belong here. But what it does is that it shuts up the people who have suffered the most from sharing their point of view and sharing their pain. And I think there needs to be space made for that pain. And it hasn't been, like there hasn't been this reckoning in Bulgaria.
Yeah, and that's why oftentimes it's very important for newsrooms to have a diversity of viewpoints and reporters as well, to allow for those spaces and basically narratives to happen and to tell those stories that sometimes are like mainstream media is oblivious of. I want to bring it back to Diana. You also mentioned this kind of monolithic coverage of communism, or like telling the story of the regime. How, like, give us some examples, or what are the stories that you kind of managed to break that monolithic narrative and tell those stories of individual lives and the trauma that affected maybe those people?
Първо искам да кажа колко се.
First of all, let me say how happy I am that Michaela is here with us. I really hope to see you in the workshop tomorrow. Listening to Michaela, I realized that she has that huge freedom of expression for someone that was born at the end of that regime. I realize how important it is to deconstruct the silence. One of the challenges I face in the field of trauma is that, as we said at the beginning, trauma makes you dumb. You can't speak about that trauma. And sometimes as journalists, we have to take heed of that silence, to cover that silence. This is a huge challenge for me. Let me give you the example of an artistic approach that I saw this year at the Venice Biennale. An art installation showed that trauma was so strong that it wouldn't be possible to overcome it on our own. It showed that people needed help and support to overcome trauma. Trauma has not been inflicted on the individual. That trauma has been inflicted on a whole community, a whole group. And you shouldn't be left alone, left on your own. The team at the Venice Biennale did a wonderful job showing this. We keep talking, and that's our method as journalists, but there is silence. We have to recognize that, and we have to be able to cover it. Talking cannot overcome the silence. over the years, I've been talking to people on both sides. On the one hand, I was interested in people my age who grew up to families working for the state security structures, the secret services. And I saw their own suffering. I was also interested in people who had been forced by the communist regime to live in exile. I talked to people living in Munich. They were outcasts. Their close family members had been killed by the secret services. And I thought that they would relate to me, that they would perceive me as one of them. But they perceived me as an enemy because I had grown up in communist Bulgaria. I talked to Jill DeCaro, one of the big Free Europe stars, and she said, "You are one of them. You are one of the communists." And I said, "What are you talking about? I was never one of them." But she told me, "Well, you were a member of their youth structures and of everything communist." There was nothing I could tell her. I couldn't respond. That woman had lived in exile, and I came from communist Bulgaria, so I was the other one. That conversation with her helped me avoid taking things personally. Her divided personality, a Judy who really loved me and a Judy who blamed me, helped me. Sometimes you are unable to show a story, but these unshown stories help you grow. I collected a huge amount of stories of people whose fathers worked for the secret services in Bulgaria. I thought I would put it up in a book. I would write a book based on all these stories. Ultimately, after analyzing so much, I realized that throughout I had been struggling with my anger at these people's loyalty to their fathers. They were indeed loyal to their fathers, and they were quite comfortable with the privileges that they had enjoyed thanks to their parents being members of the secret services. I was trying to be neutral and to cover their point of view. And I ultimately realized there was no way I could write that book. The turning point that made me realize that was a conversation with a psychotherapist in Sofia. Her father had been a diplomat in the Middle East, but he died in a car crash when she was 16 years old. His coffin arrived sealed, and his family couldn't see the body. And this psychotherapist told me that this topic was a taboo in her life. She said, "I can't talk more about this, and I will never talk more about this." So this made me realize that there are frozen feelings and emotions in people, and I realized that there were such frozen feelings and emotions within myself. Sometimes, as journalists, we have to be okay with being unable to meet a deadline or to cover a story. And this is our way to grow and help our community.
Like stories that we left unpublished or the silences in those historic moments or societies that have been through trauma. Jana, I want to briefly though come back to you and touch, like we spoke about the mistakes that we've done as reporters. We talked about the questions that we shouldn't ask. But maybe can you tell a little bit about the role of media in healing, or like creating that space for healing in societies where there is an intergenerational trauma?
Yeah, I am in a foolish head of expert which gives advices on everything, which I don't like. I prefer to be one of you. So I am also from background, my background is repressed family. So, and I actually turned it into my professional adventure. So I did doctoral dissertation on intergenerational transmission of trauma. So our traumatic experiences are transforming into good deeds, which you are doing, ladies. So that's great. And also I tried to transform it, in my case, into something meaningful. And I remember Kevin's documentary on Hiroshima, when the lady who actually witnessed the explosion and survived, and her memory was about broken window, just immediately broken after the explosion. She heard, and she was all her life long doing beautiful, colorful windows, vitrages. And Kevin is asking at the end of the movie, is it because of your traumatic experience from childhood? And she says, no, I just love colorful windows. But no, we all are actually coming from our childhood, yeah, from our trauma experiences. So if our technician will just put on slide, not to invent bicycle, I just prepared slide to show what should we avoid as journalists and clinicians in terms of dealing with the past, and what could facilitate dealing with the past. What facilitates? Dealing with the past should be facilitated, and media can play a crucial role. So justice-making process, media can contribute, could advocate for, and that's so important to facilitate. Reflection on the lessons learned, like you are doing, just great, yeah? Memorization, stories, memorization of cases, yeah? Or what should we avoid? So sharing narrative of victimhood, because narrative of victimhood creates so-called entitlement ideology, and then we can just sink into revenge. Shared narrative of glory, it's also under question mark, because it could be misused like Putin is using now, Second World War victory as shared narrative of glory to motivate to invade Ukraine and Georgia and other countries. A revengeful mourning, that's something we should avoid, yeah, this discourse of revenge. And entitlement ideology and decision dividing on we and they. But actually the main take-home message probably we should help our society to stay within the window of tolerance. So to feel emotions, not to deny right to feel emotions, but to think at the same time. That's for journalists, recommendation, but also for journalists to help society to stay within the window of tolerance, and reflective publications on what has happened, on digestion of past, that helps the public to learn lessons and not to repeat past mistakes in the present and future. Thank you.
Thank you, Jana. And now I would like to open the floor for questions. Yep, there's one.
Мой въпрос е към Михаела, ако може.
Thank you. My question is directed to Michaela, and I will ask it in Bulgarian. I hope it's not a problem for you to answer in Bulgarian. My question is the following. I'm sorry to say it, but you seem quite sad to me. Isn't this a hindrance in your personal life? Isn't your work actually affecting your personal life? You work with very difficult subjects. So how do you avoid these unpleasant situations so that you can feel also happy with your job? Of course, we work for money, but also we should be happy with what we do.
I think it's a good idea to be a journalist if you're working for money. Like, bad plan. I also work for personal enrichment or joy. I gain a lot of joy from creating a safe space for people. I gain a lot of joy from letting people tell their stories or helping them tell their stories. I gain a lot of joy from actually this connection that I described, you know, hopping to people's homes and lives and connecting with them deeply within the amount of time that we have, whether it's a day or 2 days. Just the process itself, the process of journalism, I love, and it fills me to no end. The product that comes out of it, like all of us, I am sometimes less happy with it. I do sometimes feel complicit. I have a lot of critiques to all of the publications that I work for, all of the publications that I love. I think it's very important to be critical of the publications that we love, because we want them to get better. I wouldn't describe myself as a very sad person. I think I'm an eternal spring of optimism, actually. Like, I'm a very resilient person. I'm sharing here my deepest trauma, basically, and that's why I'm always so anxious to give these talks, because this is like basically the scariest thing that I could possibly talk about, and I'm talking about it to a room of people. Please.
Actually, in psychotraumatology, we are speaking that if person deals effectively with the past traumatic experience, he or she becomes wiser, but sadder. Sadder, but wiser. So, of course, sad things, we should be congruent when we are speaking of sad things. I cannot be very cheerful and joyful when I am speaking of my family's repression story, actually, yeah, political repression. So, that's natural reactions, sadder but wiser.
Thank you so much for making space for my sadness.
Thank
you. Did that answer your question? No? Feel free to ask again or ask me later. I'm sorry.
Other questions?
I was coming from the sadder and wiser space. Thank you for the amazing panel. I can't help but wonder, there's people who identify as women on the stage. And I come from the field of gender-based trauma. So I want to ask you, wow, what is the question? The question is, why is there so much attention in the victim side of gender-based trauma as intergenerational, as well as something that is so pervasive? Why do we always focus on the trauma in the gender-based violence? In another way, is there any other way of looking at gender-based violence without making trauma small? Are there other narratives that you have encountered?
I have something to say about this. Do you guys have? Okay. So a few years ago, I worked on a story about women of color immigrants who were sort of reclaiming their identity in the US through surfing. And it was all about, you know, how surfing was historically a white, male-dominated sport. And this story, you know, the idea of the story was not to victimize the women to be serious about what it is that they have faced in the past that has kept them away from the beach, and why they're learning at an old age, like older age, to swim for the first time, especially when they're coming from island nations, you know. All the absurdities, yes, we're facing them, but the core of it was joy, you know? There's just the joy of, okay, we have come to this place at this age, whatever it is, 30s, 40s, and we are learning to swim and we're learning to surf, and there's joy in the connection with nature. And I really believe that these stories are important. They're more important actually for the people from the communities that they come out of. And a lot of the criticism that I received for this kind of storytelling, especially at Berkeley, was, well, I as a white person don't get what the problem is. There needs to be more focus on the conflict. There needs to be, you need to show me why this joy is important. Why is this political? And I'm like, if you don't get it, maybe it's not for you. I don't know. Yeah.
I will add from the another sphere, example from illustration, probably from another sphere. If you remember, during COVID pandemics, at the beginning, there were a lot of resilience stories. So parents were stating that finally I now communicate with my teenager and I know how she grew up, etc. Or about parents, finally I am playing chess with my father and he's so happy. And all of a sudden, after several months, people started to complain. They told, well, I feel sad, and please validate this feeling. Well, I feel angry, please validate. Do not deny my right to feel my negative emotions, please. So it's so important to validate negative emotions as well, and not to actually to just try to be polished and happy and keep smiling all the time. Those survivor stories are, of course, very important, and resilient stories are important. But there are something which we cannot mend, and this should be acknowledged. Balance is very important, of course.
And with that, I would like to thank you for taking part in this panel and sharing your stories and important insights. Thank you very much, ladies.